In this video, I'm going to show you how to bench bleed a master cylinder, and you'll see exactly why it's important to do so, and you'll also see how we managed to dodge a bullet on this one. Now, this is a new brake master cylinder. If you were bleeding a system or adding fluid to a system with an existing brake master cylinder that already had brake fluid in it, you probably wouldn't have to go through this process. With the brake master cylinder off the car, we should be able to actually bleed this by ourselves without having to press on the brake pedal, just by putting this in a vise and actually pushing the air out using this here. Now, in order to bleed this brake master cylinder, we've cut two pieces of brake line here. You can get master cylinder bleed kits with plastic tubes, but we don't have one of those, so we're going to make up our own. We've just cut two bits of brake line, flared the end of one side and put two fittings on. Now, we have three outputs on this brake master cylinder, and one of them we are going to blank off with a blanking off fitting like that actually came with one of our master cylinders. If you don't have one of those, you could just put a spare bleed nipple in there. You could even take one of the bleed nipples from one of the calipers, because at this stage it won't matter. Next up, we're going to attach our reservoir, making sure we attach it the right way round, like so. We're going to lubricate this here with a little bit of brake fluid, because that is quite a tight fit in there. Next up, all we need to do is screw these fittings in here and then bend them so that they end up inside here. So here's our setup here. We've got these two tightened up with a brake line spanner. Remember, the back one here is the rear brake, so that's going to go to the rear brake compartment. These compartments are separated, and the front two here are going to go to the front compartment, and we've bent those pipes down so they're nearly touching the bottom. And next up, we're just going to fill this with brake fluid, and then we're going to start pumping this slowly but surely, and start pumping the air out. So we filled both these chambers up just with some Phoebe .4 plus, and it's just a matter now of pumping. Now, if you were using clear plastic tubes here, you'd be able to see the air coming up, but we won't be able to see the air coming up. But what you will be able to see is the air bubbles coming out when we push this in. Unfortunately, disaster has struck, because this brand new master cylinder is actually leaking here. But when I press this in here like so, we are unfortunately getting brake fluid leaking out of that rear seal. Well, if nothing else, at least it shows the advantage of trying to bleed the brake master cylinder when it's not on the car, because if this had been on the car, you would not necessarily see that brake fluid leaking there. That would just simply leak into the bottom of the brake booster and eventually ruin the rubber diaphragm and rust the brake booster out from the inside out. It's the next day, and I've been in contact with the company that we got this from. We bought this from a company called autocity.eu, based in Belgium, and unfortunately they don't have any more of these in stock, and they don't have the rebuild kit. So what they've offered to do is give us a 50% refund, which they did yesterday, which was very kind of them. They also gave me the part number of the ATE rebuild kit. The ATE part number cross-references with the Mercedes part number, and I've used that Mercedes part number to order a refurb kit, hopefully the correct one for this master cylinder, and that's going to come from a company called Bigg Red, and we use them to get the pistons and resealing kit for the front calipers on this Mercedes that we're doing. And the good thing about Bigg Red is they send stuff out for next day delivery, so I'm hoping that those seals will arrive later. We do actually have two other master cylinders. This is the master cylinder that came off the car here. It's a little bit rusty, but we've been bashing this with a mallet to try and get the pistons out of the calipers, and I can verify that it doesn't leak. But as I say, it is a little bit rusty. So one thing we could do is just go over that with a wire wheel and paint it. Similarly, we also have this master cylinder here, which is one of the parts that came with the car. I've no idea whether this leaks or not. It looks a bit manky and rusty, but we could try taking it to pieces, and you basically do that by undoing that snap ring there and pulling everything out, hopefully. that's not always as easily said as done, because we originally wanted to take this here to pieces. We took the snap ring out, but that is seized in there solid. The good thing is it's not going to leak from there. The bad thing is it's almost impossible to get that out without ruining it. So plan A, we wait for the seal kit to arrive, take the snap ring out of here, hope it all comes to pieces, put the new seals in, put all this back together, re-bleed the master cylinder, hope that there's no leaks. Plan B is we strip all the rust off this master cylinder, being careful not to get any dust and particles inside the master cylinder, and put that one back on the car. And plan C, this is an unknown quantity here. We take the snap ring out there, see if we can get it to pieces, or in fact we could test it before we take it to pieces and see if that leaks. So we've got plan A, B and C. Let's wait for those seals to arrive. Just as a slight aside here, this is the brake cylinder from our 1965 230 SL, and the seal kit for this was only about £4 or £5, and we put new seals in, put it back on the car, and it still leaked. So there is a reasonable chance that when you buy a seal kit and try and repair one of these master cylinders, that you go through all the effort, you waste all the brake fluid, put it all back together, and it still leaks, which is why we would always prefer getting a actual refurb unit that's already been rebuilt. But sometimes even the best laid plans go horribly wrong. Just arrived in the post literally a few hours after we ordered it is the seal set, hopefully, for the master cylinder. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use our plan C master cylinder and see if I can open it up. The last time we tried opening up one of these, it didn't quite work because the actual insides was totally rusted to the bore. So I'm just going to see if I can open this one up just to remind myself of how the seals should look, because they have to be orientated in a certain way, and if you get it the wrong way it won't work. And I want to open up the new one and check that they've actually put the seals in the right way. So I'll compare it to this one if we can get it open. The first thing to do is to just compress this master cylinder slightly. You can either do that in a vise. We're just going to use one of these woodworking tools here, and that should allow us to get a pair of snap ring pliers in there to take that out. Now if you don't have a pair of circlip or snap ring pliers, these ones here are rubbish and useless anyway. You can try doing this with a pick like this. A pick works straight away for us to get that clip loose. That has a copper crush washer on it. That should allow us to get this to pieces. Now we'll just undo that and see if the whole thing comes apart. In theory, as soon as I release this, the whole thing should spring open, revealing the seals. And there we go, it is actually moving. Now what'd be nice is if this just sprung apart, but that is not always the case. Okay, plan C is working. Just getting some more grips on here has allowed us to pull that out. Well, that didn't actually damage the end of this in any way, shape or form. So let's just remind ourselves, circlip first, little washer with hole pointing up second. This first seal here facing towards the spring. Next comes the white plastic washer. You've got another one of these seals also facing towards the spring. Then you've got a metal washer. Now to get this seal here off, we're going to need to compress this slightly and then undo that slotted screw that's down there. So we're just using two of these clamps to depress this on a table, and I'm hoping that now that that screw is not under tension that I'll be able to undo it. I'm just holding the bottom with a set of more grips, and that screw is now turning. When you take that screw out, that is under a lot of tension, and we now have to hunt that screw and the part down. It flew off somewhere and I'm hoping that I can find it. Well, unfortunately we found this piece here, but we never found the M3 screw. It's a screw like that but considerably longer, and the length of it will determine the tension of this spring, so it has to be the right length. You know, I spent hours looking for that screw, and you know where it went? It went all the way up over that wall into the next door neighbour's garden, and I found it on his patio. Now we do still need to get the other half of this out there. Okay, so there we have another 3 seals, and once again we need to pay careful attention to which way they're orientated. This seal here is open to the back of the master cylinder. This seal is also open to the back of the master cylinder, and this one here at the front is open to the front of the master cylinder, and it is crucial that you get those in the right way. Now this little bolt here is to stop this piston at a certain distance coming out. So you have to push the piston in with something like a chopstick, and then you screw that in. Don't be fooled into thinking that it's supposed to fit into that little hole there, although it does fit almost perfectly. It's to stop the piston coming out. This spring comes off, and I imagine that this fitting here just pulls up that shaft. To get these seals off, you have to wedge a screwdriver underneath there and pry them over this lip. Now you may be tempted to use a sharp pick to do that, but the problem is if you scratch the inner surface, you may end up with a leak. So I would suggest using a little watchmaker's screwdriver, giving you less chance of actually scratching that. Now, I explained this in another video, but it's very important that you get the orientation of these seals correct, because these seals are designed to slide one way and allow brake fluid to flow over them, and when going the other way they flare out like that, causing a perfect seal. So if you get them the wrong way round, you will potentially get leaks and affect the way your brakes perform. Before you put the seals back on, I would suggest cleaning all of these surfaces here, and maybe lubricating the edge here, making sure the seal is nice and warm so that it slips over there nice and easily. You do not want to tear that seal when you put it back. We're back down at the garage, and we're going to take to pieces the actual master cylinder that's leaking. So we'll start off by taking out that little snap ring, just using this little pick here. Notice the little hole here is at the top, so when you put this back together, make sure the hole there is at the top. Now we're very gently going to release this, and that should allow this spring here. These seals are really loose on here. That should be a really tight fit. If you look down the bore here, you can see that little metal top of the bolt just there, which is this bolt here, and that's what stops that rear piston coming out. Now I don't think we need to get involved with that. This is the spare master cylinder that we took apart yesterday, and you can see it has that hole there. On the kit that comes from Bigg Red, it just has the one seal here, and I believe that that seal replaces the plastic ring and both of those seals. So we're going to try it. This is quite a tight fit on there as well. We are going to try replacing these 2 seals and that plastic ring with just this one seal here and see what happens. First we're going to put the washer on with the hole at the top, then we're going to put that new seal from Bigg Red on, and then we're going to put the other washer on with the seal at the top as well. Now we could at this stage replace this seal as well, but you know what, I'm not going to do that. I don't think there's much wrong with that seal. All we have to do now is slide this back in and compress this again and put the snap ring on. Now that seal is quite a tight fit in there, so what we've done, we've got this under compression just to push it down, as we have pushed down on the washer using 2 screwdrivers, and that should hopefully give us enough room to get this snap ring in, but we will soon find out. I think that is just about got that snap ring in. So there we have it. We've replaced the front seal here, just the front seal, not the other seals. Put the snap ring back in, and we're going to do bench bleeding the Brake Master Cylinder Mark II. Here's our setup. We're actually going to use this to squeeze the Brake Master Cylinder in. Before I was doing it with my hand, but I ended up with big holes in my hand. We're going to squeeze that in gently, and we should see some bubbles coming out of there, like so. Now obviously we are dealing with a brand new master cylinder here, so there's no rust inside the bore, but if you had taken your brake master cylinder off the car and replaced the seals, you want to be a little bit careful how far in you press this, because what you don't want to be doing is pressing this in so far that the seals are traveling over rusty areas and potentially getting damaged. As I say, that's not something that we need to worry too much about. The advantage of bench bleeding obviously is you can move the position of the brake master cylinder to get out any last bits of air. So we've just propped up the vise there on a screwdriver, and you can see that's at quite an angle. Let's see what happens when we squeeze that master cylinder now. I'm just squeezing that in now. I reckon we are pretty much free of air. And the good thing is we don't have any leaks coming out of this end seal anymore. Next up, we're going to bend these pipes out of here, put a little piece of cling film over the top of there, and then put the cap on, and that should create a vacuum in there so that when we undo these fittings here, we don't just get brake fluid pouring out. Of course, I forgot the cling film, so we're just going to use a little bit of bubble wrap. We've kept the little filter out for this section, and that little tiny hole there is a vent hole that would normally allow air in and out to stop you building up a vacuum as the level of your brake fluid falls as the pads wear down. Just remember when you're tightening these bolts here, that the nuts that keep the master cylinder to the brake booster, make sure you tighten them in a crisscross pattern just so that that seal actually seats properly. Und jetzt der Moment, dass der Mensch vom Affen unterscheidet, or as I say in English, the moment of truth. I'm going to undo that. There will be some brake fluid that comes out of that. I've undone the other end of this pipe because it's a new pipe that I made up, and it's not exactly in the right position. It has to be bent in the right position, and this screws in at a slight angle, so it's easier to get that fitting in when that fitting is undone. That's the front pipes on. The only advice I would give is make sure that you have plenty of kitchen roll when you do this. Whether it makes any difference at all having that on there, I'm not so sure, to be perfectly honest with you. Now it's time to start bleeding the brakes, and it's important to remember that the rear chamber and front chamber are separated. So we're going to start off bleeding the rear brakes, but we must remember to top up the rear chamber as we go and not be thinking, oh, we're at maximum level in the front chamber, because otherwise you'll never bleed the brakes successfully. So we'll put some more brake fluid in now up to the maximum level here, and then we'll set about bleeding the brakes, starting with the furthest wheel away, which is that rear wheel over there. So the way I'm bleeding these brakes is I'm undoing the brake bleed nipple here, and then I'm going to put my foot on the brake and keep it there, use a piece of wood to keep the brake pedal there, and then I'm going to come back round to this side of the car, tighten up the brake bleed nipple, and then release that piece of wood, and that's how we're going to do it. So we've just used this piece of wood to depress the brake pedal and hold it down. That will squirt a tiny bit of brake fluid through the pipes, and you'll see the level falling. Then we're going to come round to the back of the car, tighten this up. It's quite a long pipe, that's why you start with this one first. We haven't got any brake fluid coming down here now. We've tightened that up. Now we're going to release that piece of wood and repeat the process. That's why we're not seeing any brake fluid coming out there, because we've got a leak at the brake union, so we're just going to check that out. I think we're just about done on this side as well. We're just going to do one last push of the brake pedal. I reckon that's just about done. We've finished bleeding the rear brakes, and we've just got to remember to top this rear chamber back up to the maximum level. Flowing there, and you can see the bubbles coming out. Give it another squeeze on the brake pedal, see if we can get a few more of those bubbles coming out. that is all the brake lines bled. We've got all the bleed nipple covers back on. Usually after you've bled the brakes, you would take the car for a test drive and test for any leaks, but as this car's not yet mobile and we're not going to do that, our next job is to wire up these plugs here. I think I'm going to do that in the next video and leave this video here.